All right, all right, all right. Brian Tiny Crypto Blog. So the question, who do we owe the debt to? So this came up today, popped in my head, where I was listening to an explanation, I think it was on Tim Pool's channel, where someone questioned one of the chief White House advisors, economic advisors about money and, well, if we can just print our own money, why do we sell bonds? Why do we even do that? We can just print it ourselves. And then, man, that guy did not know what he was saying. It was too painful to listen to, just the level of not knowing, the level of just plain ignorance. It was just painful. And I've been down that road learning about what is money and how does the monetary system work. And I think that it's important to know about this. And so I'll explain it in simple terms. What led me to this? So it started with a video I had made over the weekend where I was talking about US debt approaching the event horizon, as I called it, because for the longest time I had not seen where our debt levels were. When I remember the days in the 80s when getting a $300 billion annual deficit was just, it was mind blowing. And I remember, I think it was during the Obama years, either 2008 or it was somewhere in the last 10 years or so, that we had a $1 trillion annual deficit. And now the federal debt is growing $1 trillion every 90 days. And that blew my mind. And then when I looked at the debt clock, which if you've not seen that, it's a website which tracks all kinds of different levels of debt. And the interest that we owe on all the debt that's floating around the world is at about, I don't know, $850 billion. So it takes almost a quarter of the year of debt, not revenue, just debt, to pay off the interest of what we owe. Well, so then it led to another video where Keith at CryptoCoin Mindset, he went off on my video, but that also got threw in more thoughts, which got me thinking. And then today, Dan Tubbs over at lotuseaters.com, to the British folks on the other side of the pond, he has his Brokenomics videos or segments that he does, and he's talking about basically the same thing, kind of acting as a watchman or a canary in the coal mine, that we're reaching that point where, in my eyes, we've crossed the event horizon and we're falling into the black hole, and there's it's too late to change course. And that takes us to, let's get Dan up here. There we go. Hey, Dan. We got him, and he brought together a lot of information which led to the conclusion and just reinforced this point that there's an energy out there that's standing out that people are picking up on, and we have crossed the event horizon. So what does this all mean? Let's go into money. So I'm going a little bit off of script here. So if my eyes go off screen, that's why. Just putting on my thoughts. But who do we owe the debt to? People say, well, we owe it to ourselves. Not true. The way it works is kind of like, basically think of a person, a company, a government. They want to spend money on something. They don't have the money to do it, so they borrow it. And in this case, they do it through selling bonds. And those bonds are basically just a financial instrument that is a promise to pay back that money in a certain period of time, and then with a little bit of extra interest tacked onto it. So you could sell a bond, borrow money effectively, that you have to repay in 30 days, I think, 60 days, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. And I think they still have 30-year bonds. I believe so. And the idea is that every year, you pay some of that interest. So if you are a person, a bank, a company, a government, and you borrow $1,000 at 5% interest, at the end, let's say for 5 years, at the end, or just say for 1 year, at the end of that year, you're going to pay back, you promise to pay back that $1,000 that you borrowed that you could spend on whatever you wanted to spend on, plus an additional $5 for interest. So $105. The mechanics of it can differ. We have a central bank. So what happens is we borrow the money from the central bank. The central bank issues those bonds on behalf of the government. And then the money that comes in goes to the central bank, goes to the governments, and then the government spends it on whatever it spends on. So that's basically how it works. Now, we can, in that process, what's happening is we receive that money. I need to pause this for a second. Hold on. Okay, I just need to clarify some thoughts in my head. So where we are is a situation where the interest on the debt, we've been borrowing continuously more than is taken in to pay for everything, which comes in through taxation, fees, tariffs, if that counts, duties. But more the government is spending, in this case, we're talking about the US federal government, is spending more money than it's receiving as revenue. And so there's a deficit. And in order to cover that deficit, it borrows money. It's kind of like using a credit card. I don't have the money to cover my expenses, so I'll put on my credit card. Well, then the next month, you still don't have enough money. So, okay, I'll borrow some more money to pay off the money I owe, and then I'll cover my expenses. And then the next month, excuse me, I owe more money, so I'll borrow some more money to pay what I owe from last month, plus the interest, and then, cover the expenses. And the debt, I think it's at the total amount of the annual debt is $34 trillion and growing, $1 trillion every 90 days. I'm going to do some simple on the screen math. If you've got $34 trillion, we're going to clear that out. $4 trillion divided by 34 means it's growing 10% a year. If that were investment, that'd be great, but it's not. It's IOUs. And the amount of money we owe divided by, wrong way around. Yeah. And so we're at a spot where people are saying, well, we can just print the money. Why don't we just print the money that we owe? That way we pay off the debt. The problem is that money and the value of money, the purchasing power of money, is not static. The same rules of supply, demand, and value apply here as well as with anything else, where the more abundant something is, the less it costs because it's easier to acquire, versus the rarer something is, the more expensive it is because it's more difficult to acquire. So I'm going to be using an example of Mickey Mantle baseball cards. A lot of you may not know who Mickey Mantle is. He was a very good baseball player for the New York Yankees back in the mid 1900s. And his rookie card for the longest time was always the example given as one of the most expensive baseball cards, partly because he was good, but partly because it was so rare. I don't know the exact number that are floating around, but let's, for an example, say there's 100 Mickey Mantle rookie cards in existence, and that's our money. So let's say for us, one Mickey Mantle baseball card could purchase us a car. let's say a $30,000 car. Well, let's say someone prints 100 more, or finds 100 more Mickey Mantle rookie cards. So now the circulation has doubled. Someone out there is going to say, well, it's a little bit easier for me to get a Mickey Mantle rookie card. If you want to trade that in, say, I'll sell it to you for 30,000. Like, well, no, because there's more cards out there. There's a greater likelihood someone's going to say, I'll sell it to you for 29,000. It's still worth it for me. And so as soon as that sale is made, where someone buys it for 29,000, all of a sudden, every single Mickey Mantle rookie card is now worth $29,000. Well, it's the same thing with currency. When in an economy, for everyday purchases, what you get paid, your hourly wage, what you pay for a gallon of cow milk, moo moo, what you get for a box of pencils, what you pay for a pair of socks, a gallon of gasoline, what you pay for a house, pretty much everything. Let's just say you have $1 trillion in circulation. Well, if you think of COVID, the government printed, meaning they borrowed this money or made it out of thin air, which does happen, another $1 trillion. All of a sudden, it's not that you're getting $1 trillion richer, you're putting that money in the circulation, but just as with the Mickey Mantle rookie card, there's that much more money floating around, that much easier to get it, and the value, because it's not as rare, goes down. And all of a sudden, the value of every single dollar that is currently floating around in existence, whether it's the paycheck you just deposited into your bank account, the value of your Mickey Mantle baseball card, if you're lucky enough to own one, the value of your car, the money that pays for gasoline and bread and groceries and buys a movie ticket and a pair of shoes that you use to go to a go to a concert, the value, and your savings account and any investments. Let's say you own a certificate of deposit. Let's say you own like a few shares of stock. Let's say you got the Robinhood app and you own some Apple stock. Let's say, anything and everything. The value of the money that those things are valued in has just gone down. And the purchasing power it also means the purchasing power goes down. So not all inflation is because things are getting harder to acquire. It's because greedy people are raising prices. It's because there's not enough gasoline. Those factors do come into play, but over the last 50 years, the overriding factor has been the amount of money in existence and the devaluation of everything, the devaluation of money that everything is denominated in. That has what has gone down in value. So think about this. Back in the 70s and even the 80s, one income could raise a family of 4, afford to send someone through college, maybe even 2 kids through college, pay a mortgage, buy a car. And it's not because we were necessarily richer, but the currency was more sound. It was stronger. Every dollar in circulation had more purchasing power. Now we're at a point where even 2 incomes can't stay afloat and is barely getting by a family. When you print more money faster than the amount of productiveness of humans can increase, whether they've got new software, whether it's new technology, whether it's things like investing in equipment where before it was all done by manual labor, whatever it is, it's more money chasing the same amount of goods. The price is going to go up, but it doesn't go up because all these things are suddenly more valuable in its use or in its value to us. It's because the amount of money within this enclosed ecosystem of ours has increased, and so the numbers are increasing. At the same time, the purchasing power decreases. Years ago, I can't remember exactly when, it might have been, there's a guy, Dmitry Orlov, who wrote a book, The 5 Stages of Collapse. He lived in the former Soviet Union and saw how a lot of systems broke down. Things like the responsibilities that are managed through government entities like fire, police, security, repairing the roads, the sewers, administration of laws, those sorts of things, societal levels, how people interact with one another. He saw these and he was able to break it down by stages. I can't remember if it was him or if it was someone else I quoted, that I read this quote of, where they said, in the early stages of hyperinflation, everyone thinks they're getting rich. That's because the numbers are increasing. If you look at the stock market, if you look at the Case-Shiller housing price index, which is sort of like an index that tracks, or it shows what the average purchasing price for a home is in the entire United States. That's reaching record highs. Stock market, as bad and as sluggish and as rough as things are out there, that continues to go up. I never thought I would see this, but I genuinely believe we're in these early stages where all we're seeing is devaluation, and more money gets printed, and the debt keeps growing at a faster and faster pace. And this is worldwide now. It's not just the US. It's the entire world. It's the Western world. It's Asia, South America, places in Africa. And the one thing that is universal is that we're facing currency devaluation. My suggestions of things to educate yourself about would be the value of tangible assets, owning a business that creates cash flow, or some sort of business activity, having a financial stake in it. Owning tangible assets, whether it be physical or digital, real estate, collectibles, whatever it is, owning farmland. And because those things will retain their value regardless of the number of units of currency it's priced in. A farmland's going to produce so much food, and that food has so much value. A business can make something or serve people, so many people, or make so many things that people use in a day. Those digital or physical assets, like say numismatics, those things, there's scarcity in how much is available, and as a universally accepted store of value, there is a tangible, redeemable value for those things. And I don't know what's going to happen. Printing more money, there's multiple paths that people who have a hand in monetary policy and what is done, how things are managed, they can continue to print money, in which case you get devaluation, and eventually, if it's nothing's done, it's just going to increase to the point where it's hyperinflation, and we're going to see things like Weimar Republic. We're going to see things like Zimbabwe in 2008. We're going to see things like Turkey. I think it was 5 years ago, where they had horrible double-digit monthly inflation, hundreds of percent each year, and their currency lost their value. Or it's going to be like Argentina multiple times in the last 50 years, where their currency gets devalued. There's default, which basically means you don't make payments. You say, you know what, we're broke, we can't make payments. If you hold a bond, maybe you're either going to get nothing, maybe you'll get 60 cents on the dollar, maybe you'll get 80 cents on the dollar. But basically, we are breaking our agreed upon obligation to pay you back that money that we borrowed. Go back to the beginning of the video, plus that interest. You're not going to be getting that, in which case the consequence is the people who lent the money are not going to get back everything that they borrowed. Plus, there's the breaking of trust, where if that entity that defaults wants to borrow again, the people that lend that money are either going to say, no way, you defaulted last time, and I'm not going to give you money knowing that I'm only going to get 80% of it back. Or like what happened after 2008 in Italy and Greece, yes, we'll loan you money, but we're going to cover the risk, we're going to charge, it's only going to be at a higher interest rate. So instead of maybe getting a 30-year bond at 5%, I'm pulling that number out of my rear end, I haven't checked what the interest rates are. Instead of 5%, we're going to charge you, we'll only loan it to you at 15% annual interest. So that if anything, if you default in, say, year 2 or 3, at least we'll get a bigger chunk of what we originally lent you back. And then, but even in that case, we're still heading towards a situation where there won't be money to cover expenses, and money's probably going to get printed, and the currency is going to get devalued. What has to happen is the spending has to stop. It cannot grow. We're at a point where we're maxed out on income extraction through taxes. You take it anything more, and you're going to be killing the goose that laid the golden egg. We're not going to be able to maintain everything because it's all going off to pay off debt. It's just like in personal finances. If 10% of our check is going to pay off credit card debt plus interest, well, then, okay, that means 90% of our check can be used for all the other expenses. If 40% of our check is going to pay debt on our credit card plus the interest, that only leaves us with 60% of our paycheck to pay for the things that we need and want. It's the same thing with the governments in this case. More and more of its annual revenue is going towards debt. I've never lived through this, so I don't know exactly where things are going and how they will unfold. All I can say is do some reading, see things that happen. Some books of old come to mind. There's a book. Oh boy, I'm going to have to look here. Great Reckoning and The Sovereign Individual, written by Lord Rees-Mogg, the father of the current guy in the House of Lords, I think it is, and James Dale Davidson, who I think is still alive. And they talked about different trends going on, a lot of things in our world where we have basically the breakdown of centralization and the application of force and scale, where things are going to smaller and smaller governmental units. We're organizing ourselves based more on our interests, and we're a lot more mobile. So as we've seen with people moving since 2020, moving to places that treat that, based on ideological views, based on economic views and values, based on lifestyle, people that want to live by a warm ocean versus people that want to live in the more desolate and empty Rockies, say. We've been experiencing that. And one of the things they speak of is how we're reaching this event horizon with the debt. And that's a good book. Those are good books to look at to kind of frame your mind. There's a gentleman, Charles Hughes Smith. After 2008, I think it's probably later in the year, I happened across his website or his blog, of2minds.com. And he was very frank and straightforward about explaining how economics work, how humans are self-interested beings that respond to incentives, and that shapes a lot of our behavior. And he's very straightforward and plain in explaining a lot of the breakdown of things. And he's written numerous books over the years, basically a collection of his thoughts. But he is a very good resource that if you're trying to understand what happens, how things are breaking down, things, how we can try and leverage. He brings up a point about there's more than one kind of capital in the world. It's not just monetary. You have uh, capital from practical skills, from business skills, from relationships, either in business, in your neighborhood, in your family, in the totality of your life. Um, and there's a few others, but these are different kinds of capital that you can build and draw on in good times, and as we're probably going to see, in tough times too. I don't want to say bad, but yeah, it probably could be unpleasant for a lot of people in a lot of ways. So, and then look at things like what are sound forms of stores of value, numismatics. Bitcoin's worth looking into and understanding to figure out, is that something that you want to have as a store of value? There are other things you can afford. I mean, even shares of stock, even if it's something that you buy through Robinhood, at the very least, it gives you some exposure where companies, well-run companies, are going to continue to exist. The prices of their stock certificates are going to go up and they're going to go down, but it's just like dollar cost averaging for anything. The price goes up, the price goes down. Just keep those steady buys in and keep building that stack. Just keep growing it, because eventually, just like after 2008, just like after COVID, we're going to reorganize ourselves and we're going to get our houses in order. And just like any ecosystem, it's almost like a pool of water, and you smack it and there's ripples and waves and disturbances and everything. But eventually the water settles and it's back to the routine of things. There might now have a big stone sitting in the bottom of the water where it didn't before, aka something has changed, just like the how humans organize themselves in business and economics and values, whatever it is. And it's a continually evolving thing, a continually evolving automaton, just this gigantic machine that we use to help run our lives. But it's going to come into an order that settles in, and we'll get through this. We'll get through the hardship. We'll get through the hard times. And so if you're accumulating those shares of stock, eventually those successful companies, they're going to be even more, they're going to continue to be successful if they're run well and prudently and smartly. And the value of those shares will increase when things stabilize, when things come under control. If you look at from 2008 to now, even if you account for the distortions from all the money printing and zero interest rate policies that were pursued and made money just so, and knew to borrow money unbelievably cheap, even then, you still had a growth in value. Companies grew in value. Apple grew in value. Google grew in value. Tech companies, whatever it is. So I'm going to leave it at that for starting points. You can go on the internet, do your searches, find some starting points, and start building from there, because you've got to have some kind of an arc for your wealth. ARK. You've got to have, Noah's Ark. You've got to have some sort of arc for the storms. And if you haven't started yet, start today. The best time to plant a tree was 15 years ago, and the second best time is today. And if you start today, a year from now, you will have 1 year of progress tucked under your belt that you no longer need to go back and do and try and cram. So there's something to be said about starting something today. Even if it's just slow incremental progress, it's slow incremental progress that's done, and you don't have to cram and try and play catch up with. So yeah. The scouts out at the edges of the perimeter are starting to make noise and say, hey, we're seeing things. So take heed, educate yourself, think about your finances, your financial position, and do what you can, even if it's only like $1 a day. Whether you're stacking Bitcoin, whether you're buying shares of a stock through, Robinhood app or whatever it is, do it because it's better than nothing. And for everything that you can save, you'll be glad. Because I think a lot of people, uh, the good assets, just like a good company, the good assets will draw people towards it, and that will help retain its value during the storm. So, with that, you can follow Tiny Crypto Blog and all the sites listed in the show notes. And with that, be well, everyone. Be prudent, be smart, and talk to you soon.